Now let's turn our attention to the red half of Manchester, because it's also been a busy time for Manchester United. In a mammoth 7-hour summit held in their London offices, the co-owners Jim Ratcliffe and Joel Glazer were joined by the Old Trafford hierarchy, including the chief executive Omar Barada, the sporting director Dan Ashworth, the technical director Jason Wilcox, and the INEOS duo Sir Dave Brailsford and Jean-Claude Blanc as well. What can we read into this this summit then? Because obviously on the pitch it's not been the ideal start to the season. They had a big decision to make in the summer in terms of the manager and keeping Erik ten Hag. Dale, I actually want to start with you on this. Firstly, with that call on the manager, do you think it was the right one?
Which call?
Just keeping him on, keeping Erik ten Hag on.
That's hard to say, really, isn't it? I mean, he's been there 3 years now or something like that, 3 seasons, and it's interesting because whenever I look at him, I think he's a new boy and he's just, trying to establish himself, but he's not actually a new boy and he is still trying to establish himself at the club. Is it the right decision? Only they can kind of make that. I wouldn't want to judge it, but I think they're a great example of where succession is difficult, Man United. And Liverpool, on the other hand, we haven't mentioned them, seem to be a great example of how a succession can go really well.
So Jim Ratcliffe did an interview with the BBC last week where he talked about Ten Hag's future, and he said that it wasn't his call on whether he should stay on as manager as well. He was also asked whether he had faith in the manager and said he didn't want to answer that question. When you read those as headlines, it does seem slightly clumsy in terms of what he said. What did you make of it, a co-owner coming out and saying that kind of thing?
It's a job to understand, isn't it? What's he doing in the room if it's not his call? And is he really just saying, look, it'll be done by a majority vote or something like that? I don't know. But look, he's a majority owner. He's another climate criminal, in my opinion, right? He's made a fortune out of burning the planet. I've just got to say that because I can't leave it without having said it. And so I haven't got a lot of sympathy for him or time for what he does at Man United, actually. But I'm a fan of Man United. I like to watch them play. I hope they get it right.
What do you make of what Sir Jim Ratcliffe said there? Do you go along with what Dale says there, that if he's in the room making these decisions, it's a bit of an odd thing to have said?
He answered the question by not answering the question. I mean, of course, he is an influential voice in that decision as to whether to keep the manager or not keep the manager. And it's disingenuous to suggest otherwise, really. Look, it's a difficult decision that they've got, especially given the decision that they took in the summer. They clearly went through a process in the summer because everybody knew about it. And they obviously spoke to a number of managers. And we are still only at the beginning of October. So to now go back on that decision would be controversial, shall we say, in the circumstances. I do think it's a little bit odd to have a sort of performative meeting in London where everybody turns up and everybody is pictured going into the venue. I don't really understand what they're trying to achieve in that respect. It would have been very, very easy for them to keep that meeting private and confidential. I don't know why they briefed that the meeting was even happening. That seems to me to be something that undermines the manager, even if the outcome is that he stays a little bit longer. Clearly, the performances on the pitch are going to cause a problem for Ten Hag. At the end of the day, the team is not winning matches, and this is the third year, as Dale says. So, look, it's a matter of time. Either United start winning on the pitch, and particularly qualifying for the Champions League, or Ten Hag will be fired. I mean, it really is as simple as that. We know how football works.
Dale, these have been called crisis talks, and Stefan says there he's not really sure why it was even being leaked to the media that these talks were taking place. Is this all being played up a bit much, or is this serious and a bit of a crisis as it's being made out to be?
It is odd to do it so very publicly, actually, and a 7-hour meeting sounds like they just can't make their minds up, right? Agonising over it, and they already made this decision once a few months ago, Stefan says, so it's a bit of a pickle in it, and you've got to think any minute now they'll bring it into Ten Hag's time at Man United.
In that interview as well that Jim Ratcliffe had, he did mention that actually that whole team that I just mentioned in the intro there that took about 10 minutes, he mentioned that actually they've all been together only really since June and July and that kind of time. Are we being a bit quick to judge them already? I mean, I know they've already made some decisions or waited to make some decisions, but Do we need a bit of time? Do the fans need a bit of patience to see how this all beds in?
Maybe. Maybe they do. I mean, that's fair. They've only just arrived. They're kind of, I mean, Jim Ratcliffe's background's not football, is it? So you've got to wonder whether that's a factor in it, you know, whether the football people at Man United might have made different decisions, might have done it sooner. I don't know, but can't know.
Yeah, I guess when you look at the whole project of INEOS, he has been involved in sport, but I take your point that actually not being involved in football, maybe that's what he was trying to get across with his answer there about Erik ten Hag. When you're in that kind of position as well, Dale, because, you know, obviously in your time at Forest Green, you've had to hire and fire managers. What are you thinking about when it comes to letting go of a manager? When does it become untenable?
It's a really good question and a key issue. So I kept, when I rescued the club, I kept the manager that we had. I kept him for 4 seasons actually, and I changed a lot about the club. I changed like nearly everything, the badge, the food, you know, it's like legendary what I changed. What I didn't change was the managers, and that was the thing the fans were most angry about. But we stabilised the club and landed 10th in the league 3 seasons running, and then I realised he couldn't take us further. And I learned in that process actually, but I think we had like 3 managers in 12 years or something like that. And in the last 3 years, I think we just had, you know, half a dozen or something like that. And it was a succession issue. You know, we got promoted to League One. Our manager left, our director of football left, our 3 best players left, and we were like in a pickle. And 2 relegations followed. It's one of the probably the most difficult, I would say, jobs and decisions in football to when to change manager and who to bring in.
Now, another more controversial element to the INEOS regime has been how ruthless they've been with the restructure. 250 job cuts early in their tenure, and also the little details such as the removal of packed lunches for matchday staff. Many say this goes against the ethos of Manchester United. Sir Alex Ferguson's former assistant, Mike Phelan, joined talkSPORT's Inside Devils yesterday and gave his reaction to some of the more unpopular changes.
Well, I hear things, and you know, I've got a lot of friends and people that are still, well, not as many now at Manchester United that I used to know, but certainly there are always issues at a massive football club. I don't know whether there's contentment there or there's a lack of it. What I do know is that they've made some pretty drastic changes. You know, that in some areas of the football club probably needed to be made, but ultimately they've chose to go down that certain path, and sometimes, you know, some of the people that I've known for years are no longer there, and that saddens me in a way, because I think there's a lot of promising people there, a lot of good-hearted Manchester United people there that have probably, over a period of time, worked extremely hard for the football club. Ultimately, you know, some would say, well, you know, you've had your time, you've had your moment. They could say that about me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hold no grudges against that. But certainly in the grand scheme of things, how many people really are there now that understand Manchester United? Probably the only people that do are the older supporters, the supporters that have stayed through, you know, the good, the bad and the ugly.
Pretty strong words there from Mike Phelan, saying the only people at the moment who understand Manchester United are the supporters. Dale, I want your view on those kind of cuts in just a moment. But Stefan, if we do look at it from a financial point of view, can you understand some of the cutbacks that INEOS are trying to make? Because actually, when you look at it, they don't make good headlines.
No, they don't make good headlines. And the surprising thing is, actually, in terms of the pounds and pence that these sorts of moves save, actually not that significant in the context of a Premier League football club. So if you look at the costs that they've incurred to actually remove those individuals, and you know, you can do the modelling yourself in terms of 250 people, let's say on the UK's average wage, the savings are not very significant. The numbers in their accounts seem to suggest a much bigger number than you would think from the 250, but it's hard to understand how that can be quite right. So we need to understand a bit more detail on that. But overall, some of these sorts of changes are the types of things that private equity type investors want to do when they come into organisations. They want to put their stamp on an organisation, both in terms of costs and disruption in terms of how they do things differently. And unfortunately, often and frequently, that means that certain people are moved out, and there's a
I mean,
retrenchment.
is that putting your stamp on a club in the right way?
I don't think it is, but especially the packed lunch thing. I mean, that's just mean, isn't it? You know, you got Jim Ratcliffe, so rich. He's a tax exile as well, as far as I understand it. You know, and footballs are about community. You know, football clubs more than anything else are about the community, and to save a few pence from packed lunches. I mean, as you say, you're saying 250 people is nothing to a Premier League club, but packed lunch, some sandwiches. I mean, I think it's going to create a bad morale and feeling within any organisation when that kind of stuff happens. That kind of penny pinching, that's not a good move.
I think part of it is about disruption of the organisation. They've had a 10-year period since Sir Alex Ferguson left. Clearly, it's not been the greatest period in the club's history. I suspect that INEOS have come in with a view that almost everything that's been done over that 10-year period has been wrong, and they want to kind of top-to-bottom change. And they recognise that some of the individuals and some of the small details and some of the PR lines that are going to come out from that change are going to be negative, but they're taking a longer view as to the direction of travel, and they'll take the pain of what they're going through now in terms of this, you know, the bad press, the sort of the stuff that Mike Phelan was talking about, because they believe that down the road, in 1, 2, 3, 4 years, they will see the benefit of it. And we'll see. But clearly, it's painful for those people who have been associated with the club over the last 20 years, or that are there today. You know, people that have been in organisations that have had large retrenchments. It's difficult not only for the people who exit, but also for the people that are left. There is a vacuum, and there is a feeling in an organisation, and there is a damage that's done in the organisation when lots of people leave an organisation, even if you survive. So that's something United have got to deal with, but they want to make very considerable change, which is why they've changed so many people at the top of the organisation.
Yeah, Dale, when there is a restructure of a club like that, and you have to make decisions such as this, when you're looking at it from that perspective, how much do you have to think about profit against principle? Because, like you said a bit earlier, OK, it's a very different level of football, but, you know, football is about community. And I think, you know, strangely enough, it's probably the packed lunches side of this that is the most baffling, because it's, like you said earlier, can't have saved that much money for Man United.
No, tiny sums of money. For me, principle always comes before profit. In football, at Forest Green Rovers, and in all the businesses that I run. But you know, I'm perhaps an unusual person. I run a group of companies. We're 800 people strong. We're mission-driven, not for dividend. All of the money we make goes back into our mission, and we treat everybody well. The people that work for us, our customers, our suppliers. You know, we have this ethos, and we have a culture as a result of that. And taking away packed lunches from Manchester United Football Club is going to damage the culture of that club.
I mean, you have to contrast what United are today with, you know, Dale's expression of what his company is. United is a company that's got a third of the business, let's say, listed, a third with the Glazers, and a third with Sir Jim Ratcliffe. So you're talking about, you know, private equity, American private equity, listed equity. A very different organisation from, you know, Dale's perspective in his businesses. And ultimately, United are not, you know, United are a listed company. The directors do have fiduciary duties above and beyond that community feel. And I guess that's where their mindset is. But ultimately, as I say, I think it's a lot more about driving the organisation through some change.
It's very strange, isn't it? Sorry, 1/3 listed, and then those 2 private equity interests. That sounds to me like a conflicted shareholding of the club, you know, that are going to have very different interests.
Well, it's even more complicated, of course, because the listed shares don't have the voting rights. So
that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it is a complicated shareholder structure. And has only been made more complicated by the Sir Jim Ratcliffe coming in.
Dale, just to make that a bit clearer for fans, just how chaotic is that kind of situation in terms of running the football club?
Well, I think it's neither one thing nor the other. If it was a proper listed business, it would work in one way and you could understand it, and that there are rules around fiduciary duty and stuff like that. And then you've got American venture capital interests. Jim Ratcliffe, he's British, but he doesn't live here, so I don't know what country you'd say his interest from. What he's not resident for tax purposes anyway. But they're going to have different desires, different outlooks, and then you've got this listed third that can't even vote. That's one thing nor the other. That as an entity, I think that's a crazy confusion of shareholding. And maybe that's why the club is so conflicted and ineffective on the pitch.
Just finally on this, I asked you earlier about sacking managers. If you were in charge at the moment at Manchester United, given the situation, if you'd been in one of those 7-hour crisis talks, do you think you would part company with Erik ten Hag at the moment?
I think after 3 years, I probably would. And the amount of money spent in the transfer window and the performances, not just the results, but the performances, I probably would.
By the way, you can get your lowdown on Manchester United on the talkSPORT YouTube channel. Inside Devils is where you need to go. That's where Mike Phelan was speaking as well. All sorts of brilliant guests on there. So make sure you check out the talkSPORT YouTube channel for that.